Very good evening and welcome to In Focus. I am Ethan Tashavia. Now, let's go straight into this. This week, actually last Thursday, the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement entered into force. Now, let me take you a little bit back on what Africa aspires to be in, according to Agenda 2063. And then we look at the aspiration number 2 of the agenda, which envisions that an African continent, an integrated African continent, politically united and based on the ideals of Panafricanism and the vision of African Renaissance. Now, we also know that Panafricanism is based on the belief that unity is vital to economic, social, and political progress and aims to unify and uplift people of African descent. However, some analysts say that Africa is the least integrated bloc on the world, thanks to the continued outbreak of xenophobic violence despite the push for economic integration. And now the question we are asking tonight is Pan-Africanism still relevant in this modern day politics, where Pan-Africanism is actually as if it is against a nationalism? To help me discuss this topic, shortly I'll be introducing my panelists, but let me engage you here on Twitter and remind you that you can tweet us on the InFocus, the hashtag InFocusRW, and where we'll be talking about Pan-Africanism in modern day politics. I see a number of comments coming in. Of course, this was posted earlier by Nizeimana Innocent. Pan-Africanism. Let me go back here. Anyways, let me take this one, since we are taking a bit long to get this one back. Nice. Here it is, I guess. Zaimana, where it says Pan-Africanism was based on the belief that unity is vital to economic, social, and political progress, and this belief is still valid. However, in the modern politics, with certain leaders going against integration, the movement has lost its meaning and is therefore irrelevant. There you go, and Zaimana saying that. Let me also read this one before I introduce my panelists. Dr. Namanya Fred, our elders who sat in Addis Ababa in 1963 need to be credited for having fought for African independence, unlike our current leaders who are tearing themselves apart instead of fighting for Africa united under one government. Borders are a creation of colonialists meant to divide us. Now, these are the comments that I'll also be coming back to read later on in this show. But let me take this time to introduce my panelists. And to begin with, on my immediate left, Janine Munyashuri, who is an economist and an analyst as well. Thank you so much, Janine, for joining us here.
Thank you for having me.
Right after Janine, we have Ambassador Zino Mutimura, who was a Commissioner for Political Union and International Relations at Pan-African Movement, Rwanda. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
joining us.
Thank you.
I hope you're doing well. I hope and then, of course, we have Gatete Nyiringa Buruhumuriza. I hope I got this right this time. Nice. Gatete is a blogger, a writer, a lawyer, everything, name it. The list is long. And thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Thank you.
I hope you all had a good weekend.
So far, so good.
Now, let me start it off with Ambassador Zino. I know the core values of Pan-African movement in Rwanda were developed along the lines of African Union Agenda 2063, but localized to the Rwandan context. And they include the quality of people, ideological independence, unity of purpose, pro-people solution providers based on people-centered development, and of course developing an innovative, transformative mindset. But let's look at the value number 2. Ideological independence. How far are we as Africa? Maybe as Rwanda as well.
Thank you so much. As far as we're concerned, why don't you start from Rwanda?
Mm-hmm.
Then we'll go to Africa.
Yes.
Rwanda is liberated, but we're still in the process of liberation. Because liberation is a process, it's not an end in itself. Now, when you talk about that, well, to answer your question, let's go to what you have as the Constitution of Rwanda, Article number 11. It talks about culture. And then it goes on to talk about homegrown solutions. that presupposes that it's people-centered. You draw back from actual culture. That's the basis of Pan-Africanism. People-centered. I think it's very important. So I think that one helps us to know that from there then, when we go to Africa, we're part of Africa. And after our liberation, there's quite a number of things that have been done in this country. Some of them actually they call them miracles. Because from where we came from, one would wonder how we came to this place. Now, maybe let me go back to Africa and Rwanda. We talk of continental free trade area.
Exactly.
It's a breakthrough, although it's not complete. It's complete in the sense that actually it is into force now. But I think it was negotiated here. Mm-hmm. Our president was driving it. He was the chairman of African Union. And I think that one also gives us hope and aspirations for what are aspirations for Africa. So I think, I don't know whether I've answered your question. But,
well, you did, but I also want to emphasize, look at last week, Rwanda joined the rest of the continent to celebrate Africa Liberation Day. And if you look at it, Janine, looking at the celebrations and the talks, I don't want to discredit what was happening here, and I don't also know what was happening at the rest of the countries across Africa. But when you see these celebrations, what comes into your mind?
Well, there are reasons for celebrating. As Rwanda, of course, the Liberation Day, which is coming soon, but as a continent as well. Although, as Ambassador said, the liberation is a process, I think it's a process still in many countries, and we don't move forward on the same pace. But there are reasons to celebrate. And we have sovereign countries.
Exactly.
Whether that sovereignty is not full and complete, we could debate, and you could have points, but there are reasons to celebrate. Particularly, I think this year, we have achieved a lot speaking with one voice. More recently, we celebrated having Minister Louise as the new Secretary General for Francophonie. And we more and more come together and speak with one voice. So I think more than ever now we have reasons to celebrate.
Yeah, that's true. But we also, I want to go back to the ideological independence, Gatete, and you can as well come in, Janine. How far are we in terms of attaining ideological independence?
So ideology is a moving concept. We have premises, we have fundamentals of unity. African unity is paramount. We have fundamentals of integration. And now we have concrete measures, concrete steps that we have seen taking shape. But ideology as such, in itself, is always interacting with ideologies that are even foreign to Africa. And ideological independence, in as far as we can think for ourselves, and in as far as we can even devise these ideas to the younger generations, and that the youth of this continent is being nurtured with Pan-African values and ideals, I think we have. Hence, the commissioner of the Pan-African movement, the purpose of the Pan-African movement is to ensure that young people have a place to go to understand what does it mean to be African. There's no continent on the planet that is ideologically pure or ideologically isolated. Ideology in itself is by nature not insular. It's a give and take. It takes ideas and values from other places and interacts and evolves. It's a dynamic thing. And I think what really matters is that we have the capacity to articulate our stand and our values first to our own people, and then eventually we share this with the rest of the world. I think Africa is contributing on the international scene quite effectively. Colleagues were talking about when we come together and achieve something that is of common interest. When we come together, we speak of one voice, we move together. I could give you examples of when we come up with the idea of collecting the 0.2% levy on eligible taxes. Now you have people from other continents who said, hold on, does it mean that you're going to create new tariffs on items and goods that you import from us? We said, no, this is something that we think is critical to the continent, and it's not going to affect, it's only eligible items, and it's not going to affect, it's 0.2% after all. It's not a big amount, but it's going to have a bigger impact on the continent. This is where African people stand firm, and many countries have started collecting this levy. So that's one example, and many more. The reforms that are taking place. The CFTA that has come into force, and we have the Peace Fund that is also coming into force. So, so ideological independence will never be necessarily something static. You can take a snapshot at any given time in history and say, right there, that was an ideological independence. But beyond ideology, you also have concrete measures and facts that have come into play, and I think we are in a good place. I think it is a good time to be African.
It's a good time to be African, yes, to some extent because of what we are seeing, but there's also a growing sense of nationalism against Pan-Africanism. Every country wants to, own a piece of, they want to be independent, they want to be isolated in a sense. Isn't that actually sabotaging the push, the achievement, or the progress that we've seen so far?
No, it's a struggle that is continuing.
Yeah.
Let me tell you one thing. This is a problem that is related to our history. And that sovereignty you're talking about. It might be a big problem. But the big problem is normally, if you want to solve your problem, you have to take big measures. Let me give you an example. You know something called aircraft? People fighting, people use aircrafts. Somebody sat down and said, no, I can't afford an aircraft, but I can fight that man. He invented anti-aircraft. A single man goes in the bush somewhere and shoots an aircraft, comes down. So it's one of the problems, but the measures we have taken so far, bit by bit, it's a question of analyzing our problem and understand the severity of the problem, gravity of the problem, and then we take measures. I think it's a problem, but I think we're solving it bit by bit. When you see Africa coming together, particularly last year was an interesting year. If you see Africa coming together and then with the Continental Free Trade Area, immediately people, so far there are over 50 countries. It has never happened before. It has never happened before. Why has it happened now? It's because there was a proper approach, there was correct leadership, and I think other problems will also be solved. Okay. So it's a process, and we should understand our problems, then we know how to devise the solutions.
Janine, on the continental level, one would say we're doing fine. But if you look at the regional blocks, we're still having issues. East Africa, COMESA, all that. But let's look specifically at East Africa. That integration, because unity of Africa, it's either confederation or united as a whole. So let's look at it. Do you think it's possible for Africa to be united when we're having regional issues in terms of, let's say, East Africa, that we all know what is happening in the region? The sabotage, economic sabotage, and of course the political wars here and there.
Oh yes, I do believe it's possible. And first of all, let's just make sure that everybody understands that although the CFTA is entering now into force, the regional blocks are here to stay. So we will always be confronted with the issues we have in our blocks, in our local bloc here, the East African Community, ECOWAS and SADC. But interestingly enough, if we sit on a bigger table with other partners and with external partners, because these are our biggest actually trade partners, the rest of the outside of the continent, maybe it will be an impetus for us to reinforce the regional blocks.
Interesting. Do you agree with that?
There's no, on this planet, there's no block that is plausibly sailing through quietly
seas.
The seas, quiet seas, and just the fact that there is conflict, push and pull in a block, that means the block is dynamic. Crisis is not always a bad thing, Athan. These hiccups that happen every now and then, they shall pass. But that means that the block, there are interests that are being confronted, and it is good because it serves as a learning and as a basis to evolve. So, like I said, you can look at the European Union right now. Some of the blocks that are plausible, it's because nothing actually happens. Or at least things happen outside of the blocks. So you have ASEAN, you have Inter-America's blocks, but there's also problems with the tariffs that the United States is imposing on that. But by virtue of being trade marketplaces, that means there's trade negotiations. Sometimes people agree, sometimes people stay the conversation for another day, and so on. So it is fine. Crisis is good. And remaining in a constant state of crisis, if it's not violent, if it's crisis of confronting ideas, confronting interests, and so on, that is fine. We know where we're going as a continent. How we get there is the modalities that we are actually struggling to put in place, and this is fine. We have new generations coming up with new ideals. It is critical that we have a Pan-African movement across Africa, in every country, because we want the young people, the next CEOs, the next decision makers, the next politicians, to be inhabited by Pan-African ideals when they come on the marketplace to trade, to negotiate. So do not see tensions and crisis in regional blocks as a bad thing per se. That means something is happening and there's a lot of negotiation.
Something bad?
Going. Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Crisis is not always bad. You can always draw something good from it.
Yeah, maybe crisis is bad, but it gives lessons, it creates lessons.
Yeah.
Well, I may not agree with him entirely. Crisis cannot be, it depends on which crisis you're talking about.
Yeah.
If there are wars, they are not good. But you can wage war to solve a problem. That I agree with you. So you draw lessons. We draw a lot of lessons from the genocide that took place here. There's nothing worse than the genocide in Rwanda. But you have drawn lessons and you go back and say we shall never go back. What went wrong is not more acceptable. So I think that's the way I can chip in.
If I may add something,
Sure.
I think it's an interesting time globally. I mean, the world is at crisis. It seems that we are witnessing almost the end of multilateralism. Europe is in a big crisis, it's going through a big crisis.
Yeah.
We don't even understand what's going on in the UK. It seems to me hope is really scarce when we speak about whether politics or economic perspectives in the world. And then something interesting is happening on our continent. Our young people and ourselves are just witnessing what we make. You have, I think rightly so, called the Renaissance. So it's an interesting time. Can it go without crisis? I don't think so. Will we make it through? I hope so. I hope so. And then parallelly with the crisis we're going through, we have Africans really bringing content to the concept of global. We have Africans heading big global organizations, and they're not tokens. They're really speaking for Africa and with our interests at heart. So I think it's a very interesting time. Very interesting time. If we don't understand that there's a momentum that we must not miss, I don't know if we will ever do.
Exactly, and actually that brings us to what was happening last week when we celebrated Africa Liberation Day with the focus on raising continental awareness on current issues concerning the balance of power across the world. And I want to understand what is the current share of Africa on the global scale, and how far have we gone in making sure that we have an equal share?
Africa has had problems. Let's talk about the trade. Start from trade. Africa is behind. Trade between Africa and the world is 2%. The European Union is at 90%. America is almost the same as that. Asia is 40%. That's not the best. But one thing is that which Gatete said that crises may not always be bad. We have come to realize actually Europe is no longer united.
It isn't.
It isn't.
It has issues currently.
They colonized us and managed it because they sat in Berlin in 1884.
Yeah.
They sat on the table and password Africa, balkanized it. They were united. This time I doubt whether they can do it. Because they don't even put the act together. Britain is running away. I don't know whether it knows where it is even going.
Mm-hmm.
So Africa actually is uniting. Continental free trade area gives hope. In fact, the Africans are also waking up to know that even some other people can have problems.
Mm-hmm.
We never thought Europe would have problems. Talk of the Brexit. Actually, I was listening, I think I told you about a few minutes ago. There is a video I saw of Tony Blair this morning. I think he was warning Britain. And he was saying what they are doing is self-denying. And he was projecting, he was saying that in the middle of this century, the powers that we'll be talking about are China, India, and USA. USA because it has accumulated immense wealth. It is even militarily very powerful. And he said those who have exercised power know very well when you get together, even smaller groups can have a say and will prosper. So Africa, continental free trade area, tells us that actually can get together and do some things. I don't know, he didn't mention Africa, but Africa, with the disadvantages I've talked about, if we put our act together, we can be more organized than those ones who told us that they can never be disorganized.
Sure.
So I don't think it's not all bad. But maybe I come back to Gatete.
Yeah. But sir, we still have issues. Yes, there is that progress. But if you look at it, this has been sung before, emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. Mm-hmm. And this is the issue Africa is facing. From, emancipating ourselves from the, slavery, mental slavery and ideologies of our colonizers. How do we move forward from that? I saw your thread recently, and it quite an interesting one, the one you wrote about Kisekedi. But let's move on and look at how do we move ourselves from the mental slavery. How do we emancipate ourselves?
But we are not mentally enslaved. We have, like I said before, ideology is not insular. Ideology is interactive. We're sitting here talking about Africa, and we're talking about Africa in English. It's a language that came here as a language of the colonialists. But like Chinua Achebe says, we've taken it, it's a spoil of war now. It's ours. Mm-hmm. We use it as we see fit, among other ways to communicate, like we're doing now. It's not. It's become a medium of communication which we own. Because we've fought for it, and we've vanquished, and we are free, and we have it. Among other things that we have as spoils of war. It is how we utilize it. Borders. You spoke of 1963. Kwame Nkrumah was keen to having Africa integrate as one federal country immediately upon independence in 1963 because he knew that there's power in numbers. There's strength in numbers. Today again, we can achieve Nkrumah's dream. How? We have a 1.2 billion people market. Now, when they speak of trade with the world as 2%, it is what figures show, but it is not true. Where do all the natural resources to do that trade, to infuse the entire trade system come from, the entire industry? Where is the youth workforce today? Where is the natural, where's the reservoir of water, of nature, of animals, wild animals, and so on? These are things that you still have on the African continent. They may not be quantified at Wall Street, but they are critical to mankind. Africa is mankind's hope, in as far as that's where life is still easier to achieve. It's the least polluted. It's the most resilient part of the planet. Now, the moment we understand, the question was whether we have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. How do we do that? Is by taking cognizance of our wealth and our power, and to be capable of defending it. Because Africa is like a beautiful bride. Everybody would like to marry her, or to court her.
Is courting her.
It is up to us to know to which bride we want to marry, and so on. So, to which groom do we want that courtship to continue, and so on. But the point really here is, we have the most youthful continent. We have what they call the demographic dividend that people speak of. You can see people from other continents, every time they're speaking of African demographics, it's become a problem, a threat to the rest. In fact, we are not a threat. We are an asset to the world. And so these are some of the things that we have to understand that we have, and how do we optimize them. The youth that we have, is it youth that is skilled and educated and ideologized? Yeah. It is Mwalimu Nyerere who used to say we have to radicalize Africa. Do we have the ideas? Do we understand where we stand? Do we understand what we have to do? Do we understand the mission which we are at? And that is the work of...
That's actually the question. The question, do we understand what we want? Yes, Jenny.
Yes, I'm just going to bounce on what Gatete just said about the wealth. And I think, as an economist, when I went to school and later on university, the models, the framework of thinking is an Occidental one. So there was, I think there's still no model actually to properly assess our wealth as a continent. So every day you have a new report. Let's speak about, let's say, climate change, which is one of the global threats we have, Africa and the rest of the world. And now we understand that climate change, one of the key factors will be biodiversity, and that biodiversity actually is on this continent. If a Rwandan, a Beninois, a Togolese, a Moroccan wakes up in the morning and thinks, without our flowers, our butterflies, our trees, the rest of the world is just disappearing. We may disappear as a species. We will feel wealthy and rich. And there is really, as part of the mindset that we really have to change, is to remove from ourselves the seed of scarcity. You can't have the waters we have, the arable lands we have, and feel poor. And you say, on the other hand, we say, yes, there are people who sleep without eating.
Exactly.
So there must be a few things we still do wrong, but one thing we have to undo is our perception of ourselves as poor people. And the rest of the world want us to remain and feel poor, because then we are easy to exploit. But I hope young people, even in the universities, will do research and come up with completely different ways actually to assess wealth, because it's wrong. It's wrong to think that we are poor.
Right.
If the rest of the world cannot live without us, then obviously we are rich.
Interesting conversation. Pan-Africanism, is it still relevant in Africa? The conversation still continues, but we're going for a very short break. When I come back, I'll be reading some of your comments and opinions sent on our Twitter handle, and then, of course, we'll be back with more questions. Let's go for a short break. When we come back, comments on Twitter.
ubuzima ni ingenzi kandi ubuzima ni urugendo. Ufite ubuzima nta cyiza atageraho. Iyo urwaye utakaza byinshi, birimo umwanya umara urwaye, igihe cyo kwivuza, utaretse n'ubushobozi. Uryamye aha ntaba arimo kwiteza imbere. nyamara ubuzima burarindwa, burabungabungwa, yewe buranasigasirwa. Ibyo byose biterwa n'agaciro k'ibyo urya n'imyitozo ngororamubiri ukora. Inzira ni iyi rero. Ikiganiro cyacu kidufasha gusobanukirwa indwara zitandukanye ndetse no kuzirinda. Abaganga batandukanye b'inzobere tuzababagereraho badusangiza ubunararibonye bafite. Indwara zose mudasobanukirwa, uru ni rwo rubuga. Inama zitandukanye ku mirire n'imyifatire niyo ntego y'ikiganiro. Buri gihe intero izahora ari yayindi. Menya wirinde.
Welcome back, and we're talking about Pan-Africanism and its relevance today in modern-day politics. And remember, we are live on Rwanda Television and live on our YouTube channel, which is Rwanda TV. When you click on this link, you'll definitely go straight onto the show live here. So let me read through some of the comments. There's Stephen Caleb Katurebe. Because of continued rise of nationalism that obscures the core principles of Pan-Africanism, it feels to me as though Pan-Africanism has lost meaning, and of course the efforts and determination to collectively fight the common enemy colonialism has faded. Thank you so much for your comment. Let me check another one here. Dufitumuchiza Yasoni, who says, according to Dubois and Kwame Nkrumah, Africans living in the African continent suffered under the yoke of European colonial rule, but now we see Africans suffering a bigger yoke under their fellow Africans. African leaders are after their well-being only. Quite an interesting one here. Quite an interesting one. Let's go back to, I guess we still have some comments, more comments. That's it, I guess. But let's look at this. African leaders who are so much focused on African leaders who are after their well-being. And if you look at what Africa has achieved, and this makes sense, especially in terms of continental free trade area, this has been said as the major hindrance to the implementation of this big treaty. How do we move forward, especially knowing that there are some elements, some African leaders who are not willing to come close and see Africa move as a bloc?
No, it's a problem. Of course, we have even bigger problems than that, but we shall overcome them. One, Africa is still having actually the vestiges of colonialism, the new colonialism. Take, for example, I think it's even a bigger problem when you look at some African countries having their reserves in Paris.
Exactly.
That's a big problem. But you see, be it what as it is, I think the world is coming to realize that, as I said earlier on, that those who are impeccable, we used to think we could not even have problems, are having problems of union, of unity themselves. And they have been contributing to this unity. So if we realize that that's the problem, the onus is on us. And I think we are doing well. We talked about the continental free trade area last year, which was agreed upon. Now it is implemented. It is into
force.
It's into force.
Not implemented yet.
It's into force. That's what I'm saying. You also think of another agreement that took place last year. That's a single, free Africa air.
Exactly.
Airspace, yeah.
Airspace.
Yeah.
That's not something small.
Major.
It's not something very small.
Yeah.
So those are issues that we believe that actually could be building blocks to our aspirations. Mm-hmm. So it's not a lost cause yet. You talked about the election of Ruiz. Mm-hmm. That was not something small. Rwanda was not even considered, France was and the Francophone world thought Rwanda was going astray. They thought even it was a Francophone. And yet, if you look at people who are not French, who are less than 20%.
Yeah.
But now, given what the history we have had with France, for Louise to be elected to lead Francophonie, I think it's a very big achievement.
What do you see, Getete? You want to intervene?
Yeah, I want to insist that not only is it a big achievement, but it's even a bigger one in a polarized world.
Yes.
It seems that the West cannot think differently than binary. It's either or, and Africa is showing, actually Rwanda is showing that we can do this and that. We can speak in Rwanda, English, French, Swahili. We can be both in the Commonwealth and in the Francophonie. We can even rally the continent behind our candidate, and she's now the candidate of the continent. How interesting.
Quite interesting.
Maybe let me remind you one thing. It's very, very interesting. That should give us hope. You remember something which was called mapping report? You remember mapping report? The UN group of experts crucifying Rwanda on the issues of Congo. You know, we would not have survived if we did not join the Security Council. How did we join the Security Council? We joined the Security Council because we were candidate for Africa. That means Africa united behind Rwanda. We could not have got the Security Council if we had not joined the Commonwealth. 3 countries that time. Now, can't that one give up?
That Africa is going to be...
Yeah, definitely. Africa can put that together. You have vestiges of this disorder and so disorganization.
Yeah.
But those ones can be overcome, I think. Those are a few elements, a few issues that tell us that actually if we put our act together, and we are beginning to do that. I'm not saying there are no problems. The problems are there. We have said them, and they are big. But you have to get a big way of solving these problems also.
Yes.
I just want to clarify a few things. I saw the tweets and the things that have been said. I thought it would be interesting to take this opportunity to maybe clarify a few things that I think are incorrect. Nationalism. We don't have a problem of nationalism in Africa. It is not true. I will come back to it. The other issue was, is Panafricanism still relevant? And the third one was African. I saw the last one saying Africans used to suffer under the yoke of colonialism, and now they suffer under the yoke of African leaders. Let's go to the first one. Apart from one country on the African continent, we have 54. We have only 55.
Yeah,
we have only one country where we see cases of xenophobia.
Only one.
Yeah.
1 out of 55. That means we don't have a continental issue. We don't have an issue of continental magnitude. You see, the thing with fallacies, Africa has changed, has taken shapes and forms, but a reality that was there once upon a time should not continue to define Africa, even when Africa changes and evolves. So the issue of nationalism on the African continent just does not exist. Africans are integrated. You can travel. There is visa-free for the entire planet in Rwanda. There is visa-free for all Africans in Ethiopia, in Ghana, in many countries.
Exactly.
So let me clarify those 3 things. They've come, since we are here, they've come twice, 3 times. So, my brother, allow me to appease Africans who are watching this show. We do not have a nationalism issue at all on this continent. That's number 1. Number 2, the show should be titled differently. Because when you say, is Pan-Africanism still relevant? What else is relevant? We are Africans. The question should be the relevance of Pan-Africanism explained by 3 guests. On this.
Exactly, and that's why we put it up there like that, to make sure that...
Ask an American if the idea of America is still relevant. He's not even going to engage with you in a conversation. So that question, next time you phrase it, Pan-Africanism is most relevant today than ever before. So it is really at the center of what we wake up every morning for. Pan-Africanism. We live for it. It's the meaning of our life. Rwanda we would not have been here if it was not for Pan-Africanism. There's nothing that we could have achieved that we will achieve without Pan-Africanism. So there's no question whether Pan-Africanism is relevant. That's number two. Number three, which is African suffering. People comparing bad governance to colonialism, it's funny. Colonialism is like a genocide.
But he mentioned something, magnitude. Having coffers in an international state, a country that
let me go back to that.
Yeah.
Coffers.
Yeah.
Who has coffers? Mm-hmm. The people who had coffers are Mobutu. He's dead since 30 years. We can't continue to define Africa of today through Mobutu and Bokassa and Omar Bongo. These people died a long time ago. There are no coffers. There are no Africans with coffers in the West. If we have anecdotal cases. Let me finish, and then
that's questionable.
It's true.
Very questionable.
You can give me data. Yeah. The coffers we know in Swiss banks are coffers of. We still have, by the way, on the African continent, we have anecdotal presidents, and they've become a joke of the entire continent. Presidents that I don't want to name their names, who are imposed on African people upon independence by the colonial masters. Most of them have died. There are new ones. Nature will continue to take its course. Thank God. They will also leave. Now we have new generation of African leaders who have no coffers in Western banks. And so this Mobutu, Bokassa,
the Bongo of Gabon,
Omar Bongo, Eyadema Simbe, and so on, must not define Africa. They don't even live in Africa anymore. They don't exist anymore. So we cannot take them as a benchmark of Africa of 2019. So that assertion that African people suffer under the yoke of African leaders is not true. There's a leadership crisis on the entire planet. If you ask Indians, Modi has just been elected. But I know many Indians who do not approve of his policies.
Yeah.
Americans, you know yourself. The UK Prime Minister just resigned. I can go on and on, the list is long. So leadership is something that is a perpetual negotiation. Africa is not doing bad in leadership worse than any other continent on the planet. Now, these fallacies about coffers, you can rebut or even answer. The issue of coffers, the issue of nationalism, and the issue of Pan-Africanism being relevant today, those are non-issues. Africa is the Africa that people have, the fallacy of Africa that people have has nothing to do with reality of Africa of today. Africa is a vibrant, integrated continent with a few issues to fix. So I wanted to clarify that. But feel free to...
May I?
Please.
Yeah. I will agree with Gatete on really the point of nationalism. It was very important to, it's one country and against 54 more. Yeah. On the coffers, I think what the tweet was mentioning was not as much as the personal wealth of those leaders, but the issue of the franc CFA, which is real, which is real.
Actually, I'm the one who brought up the issue.
Yeah.
Yes. I talked about some African countries still paying even the colonial
tax.
Yes,
and somebody mentioned...
That's a reality.
So it's a reality.
Yeah, but it does not mean that everything is bad now. That we are optimistic. We are not pessimistic.
And again, also one reality that we cannot belittle is we have this demographic dividend, and we still have to provide for these young people on our continent. Enough food, proper education with a content that we own, which is a whole program. Yeah. But still, there's this thing on Facebook. When you have a status, you are single, married, and there's another status, it's complicated. I think ours is complicated. Literally it is. But how about rallying the continent really to fall in love with our complicated selves? We're here to stay. We're not doomed. It is not a doomed place. It's a place where there's a lot of life. Literally, there is life. So we must do whatever we can to rally our youth, particularly, and the entire continent, really to fall in love with our complicated selves. The governance issues, the leadership issues, the education issues, health, and all of that. But just be together. with great love, everything is possible.
And that's why I was actually
But
saying
I won't belittle the issues. They're real.
And they're real.
They're real.
There always will be. We
And
are
how do
human
we overcome
beings.
that? Even that little...
The Africa that you are defining,
Yeah.
where there are no issues, and you go to maybe churches and places.
No, we want to overcome the bigger issues.
The big issues that we have in Africa now are issues. We have 12 million African people who come on the marketplace every year. We have 3 million jobs to provide for them. Issue number one, major issue. How do we address it? We address this through training. We address this through integration. We address this through providing factors of production to small and medium enterprises on the African continent. Training, so education, integration, and factors of production to small and medium enterprises on the African continent. That's the issue, that's the solution. We are working towards that solution. We have signed the CFTA, which is one of the solutions. We have, and so on and so forth. So now, we have issues of pacifying a few pockets of conflict on an otherwise peaceful continent. Because it's a peaceful continent with a few pockets of conflict. Now, when you define Africa, see, complexity is important to isolate cases and speak of them separately here. Africa is not a country like the saying goes. So, we have dufite ibibazo ariko dufite n'ibisubizo. Sibyo?
Yes.
Kandi ibisubizo, the answers, you are seeing the answers.
There are mechanisms that are
being put in place.
There's that, of course, which we all appreciate, but there's also implementing those mechanisms, which is also another issue because we have history. We've seen these things being, CFTA itself was negotiated for over 20 years, actually 40 years. So, and here we are. So it might take us another, if it's fast, maybe 10 years to see it.
And so it will be. We'll continue negotiating
and then
about everything.
Even during the signing of CFTA, there were 2 other agreements. And if you look at the progress of them, there was single air, and then there was also the free movement of people. The progress of the other two, compared to the CFTA, one would say the other ones are lagging behind.
Well, not really, because the agreement itself just entered into force, but there are many protocols under that agreement which are still under negotiation. Thanks God, at least the dispute settlement mechanisms, the protocols are agreed upon, but there will be more discussions, and really to implement the agreement will be another thing. It's like the hard work just begun. It really just begun. So we cannot say that the single air and the free movement of people is lagging behind. It's actually going all together.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm told we are left with 3 minutes, so I want to, let's have what you think, your challenge to the leaders who are going to be meeting, I think in July, to have this CFTA.
No, before I go to the challenges, well, there's a question of looking at the realities. Where the problems are, we don't cover them up. Don't sweep them under the carpet. The problems are there for us to solve them. The issue of the Continental Free Trade Area to have been negotiated, and it's in force now, within 1 year. Forget about those years. There are so many other problems that actually we have had. I think that one is very, very important. And the leaders will sit down and appreciate, but also recognize there are still problems. The other thing that can be revisited, look at the treaties, the agreement we have had. Go to Abuja Treaty. I think there is some movement. Lagos Plan of Action. Then you come to actually the NEPAD, the partnership. These are the mechanisms that have been put in place every time to improve what you have had before. Is that not positive? So when you look at the problems in itself as a problem, without looking at the approaches to solve the problems, then you go wrong.
Sure.
So there is everything positive when you analyze things and put them in the proper place. So that's my feeling.
Sure.
So when they meet, I'm sure they will have to review, find out what has been achieved, find out the impediments and obstacles that have prevented other programs not to be completed. That's my take on that issue.
Sure. Going forward, I mean, this could be your last remarks here.
Yeah.
What needs to be done to make sure that Africa moves?
I just want to remind you one thing. Remember the green agreement on climate change. The United States just walked away from it. Iran walked away from it. People agree on treaties and they can even walk away from them. It is not only, we have difficulties with treaties, it's not a preserve of the African continent. Treaties, but what I wanted to say, what I appreciate, what gives me confidence to say that Africa is changing, is when the CFTA was signed, Nigeria was not, Nigeria didn't really resign. But you cannot imagine the amount of pressure that peer African countries have put on Nigeria. So much so that Nigerians, every time they have to speak, they start with an apology of why they are late to sign the CFTA. We're talking about the biggest economy, the biggest population of the African continent, which is feeling embarrassed. In the past, some countries would have followed Nigeria and say, if Nigeria hasn't signed, I will also not sign, and so on. Now, everyone Nigeria is under scrutiny, and they feel embarrassed, and they're going to sign shortly. That shows you that we are in an Africa that is a no-nonsense Africa.
Good stuff. Thank you so much.
I think that those are my last words.
Janine, unless I'm told we have less than 20 seconds, so I don't know if you have anything
I totally agree with you. This is a no-nonsense Africa.
This is a no-nonsense Africa, and Pan-Africanism is relevant today than ever.
Before.
That's what I got, ever before. Thank you so much, Janine. Thank you so much, Ambassador Zeno. Thank you so much, Gatete, for joining us here. And thank you so much for watching from wherever you are. Up next is News in English with James Friday, and that marks the end of In Focus tonight. See you next time. I am Ethan Tashobia. Bye-bye.